Hello, friend. Welcome to another episode of Songwriter Theory. I am your host, Joseph Vadala, and today we are going to talk about a few things, a few tough lessons that I had to learn as a songwriter. And the reason that I wanted to talk about this is I was recently rethinking about some of the things that happened early on that maybe I should have expected, but I didn't. And some of those things left me a little more disappointed and even devastated than I would have liked, to the point that one of these things actually made it so that I didn't really songwrite for like a year and a half afterwards, or at least I didn't actively do as much songwriting for a good year and a half, 2 years afterwards, because of how discouraged I was over it. So some of you have been emailing me who are very beginner songwriters, and I obviously am making content for all people. I love the stories of people who are like, okay, I've wanted to songwrite for 20 years and now I'm finally going to do it. Or I used to songwrite 30 years ago and now I'm going to do it. I love those stories. Well, at the same time, I obviously want to help people who already have been songwriting. But this is a subject that I think can really help both parties, but especially will help those of you who are new to songwriting and just for setting your expectations to be reasonable about certain things, where it's easy for us to get kind of excitable and sort of have certain delusions of grandeur, or delusions of certain things that we think could happen that probably won't, just so that you have the right perspective. Because the worst feeling is something kind of discouraging happening that you didn't fully expect, and it just leaves you a little more scarred. Whereas if you're expecting some road bumps, you already knew the road bumps were there, it's not as big a deal. So that's the goal of this podcast, to make sure that when you come to those road bumps, you will say, okay, this is not a big deal, because Joseph already told me to expect this. This is not because I suck or I'm the worst or anything like that. It is just a normal part of the process. So you don't freak out. You don't quit songwriting for a year and a half, and you don't have any minor trauma as a creator. So that's the goal. And with that, I am going to open with number one, which is almost impossible to keep a reasonable or low enough expectation when it comes to success, especially at the beginning. So what do I mean by that? Well, the first thing to think about is when you first are songwriting, when you first are creating songs. Unless you're already like doing online marketing and you're doing a whole like video campaign to a video every day to like show people your progress on your music, and you make active efforts to like start creating a fan base from the internet with people that you don't already know. Unless you're doing good stuff to do like that, the main people, or only people really, that are going to have access and see your music early on, if you release an album or if you release just a single, is who? It's your friends and family, right? So one of the unfortunate realities, but also helpful things, is that your friends and family will never be impressed by you for the most part. Now, what do I mean by that? The reality is that even if your music is great, right? You might have written the greatest song of all time. Probably not, but you might have, right? No matter what, when you take that to your friend, when you take that to your parents, when you take that to people who know you, right? Especially parents, right? They change your diapers. If you take the song to those people, they can't unsee you as, like in my case, just Joseph, right? So no matter how good or bad a song may be for me, it doesn't really change that I'm just Joseph. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? That's twofold. Because that's the sort of thing that when you're ultra successful at anything, right, they keep you grounded, right? The whole, I don't know if you've heard this before, but it's like a pretty common joke with someone who's super successful, like a really successful band that's on the road, and they'll joke about like, yeah, I'm, off on tour and, I'm playing for huge audiences, and then I come home and I still have to do the dishes, right? Like, and that's the idea that like at the end of the day, no matter what you achieve, you're still human. And, we all know that, obviously, but that's the sort of thing that if you do achieve great success in anything you do, songwriting or otherwise, right? Like if you become the next CEO of Apple or something, regardless, your family seeing you as just you is going to help you through times like that so that you don't get too big of a head. So it's also a good thing. So I'm not insulting that. But as a creator, it can be a little discouraging when, like, I've had it that most of the people close to me, there are a couple exceptions, but most of the people close to me, I felt like they couldn't see the art for what it was. They were too busy seeing it as stuff Joseph does, and it's just Joseph. Which, when you create an album and you're really excited about it and you're really proud of a few songs on it, can be a little discouraging when everybody's just like, yep, cool. And the people more excited about it are some random people you don't even know, right? Like, a moment that stood out to me is some guy I never said a word to, didn't know him at all. But after a show that I did, he came up to me and like just told me how great he thought a certain song was and why he thought it was great. And forever that guy has had a special place in my heart, right? Because it's somebody who has no reason to come up to me. He had nothing to gain by doing that. He just like wanted to tell me, hey, that was a really great song, which to this day, like, I'll never forget him, even though I basically had 2 conversations all time with him. That one, and then another time I saw him around and we picked up a similar conversation. But people who don't know you are able to see your art for what it is a lot more easily than the people close to you. So you might have this expectation, and it does make some sense that like, oh, well, my friends and family are going to be the most stoked about like this new music that I made. They're going to be most stoked about this new project I'm working on. And sometimes that's true, but a lot of times it really isn't. Because the reality is that if in 3 years, which don't set this expectation, but if in 3 years you're selling out more stadiums than Taylor Swift is, your close friends, for the most part, and your family are going to see you basically no differently, right? Which again has a positive side. But you have to keep that in mind, because otherwise it can be really discouraging when you do something and you're like, man, I feel like this is really great. And the best compliments you get and the people that really seem to love it are people who don't know you. But the problem is most of who has access to your music are people who do know you. So it sort of just lands on almost deaf ears of like, oh, okay, yeah. And, there will probably be a few, right? Like I have a few people who are close to me who just love it. And to this day will be like, hey, I listened to your album again recently. I'm like, oh, wow, that's cool. Because I made that 8 years ago now or whatever. Not that long ago. 6 years, I think. That specific album. But, people who like you are not going to be the same people who like your art. I cannot over convey this. People who like you are not the same people who will like your art. Now, some people will like you and they will like your art, right? But just because people like you, right, and your friends and hopefully your family like you, that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to like your art, right? So, I might write in a very different genre than what my parents would ever listen to. So they might not like what I produce as art. They still love me though, right? Or, and that can be true all the way to a spouse, right? Like, I don't know if you've seen Parks and Rec, but early on, between Andy and April, there's like a point where I think they're married already, and it sort of comes out that she doesn't really like the music that his band plays, that he writes, and it's a big deal to him. Not because he actually believes that they're the best band in the world, but just because, he wants to be validated by, your wife or girlfriend of all people, you would want to like your music. But the reality, right, is you may or may not marry somebody that likes your style of music, right? Like, you can take it to an extreme where, like, you're writing a bunch of metal music and they only like country, right? Like, are they really going to make an exception for, like, oh, I don't like any metal except you, honey? Like, I mean, maybe in a supportive way, but let's be honest. If they took you out of it, they're not going to like it. Regardless, there's going to be a lot of friends who don't feel that way. And they'll try to be supportive, and they'll try to be nice often. But the reality is, people who like you don't necessarily like what you do, right? Those are two different things. Just like some people who like your music would not like you personally, right? There are a ton of musicians, actors, directors, like there are a ton of people out in the world that I love the art that they put out. But I might know enough about them, or they're obnoxious enough on Twitter for me to know that if I knew them personally, I probably wouldn't like them, right? So it goes in both directions. Again, but the main concern here is my expectation. My expectation was, how cool is it that I spent all my free time while in college? I sacrificed a lot of social time. How cool is it that I produced a full album while in college? Because not many people do that, right? Like, that's not common. Even for like a music major or whatever. And I was a software developer. I was a computer science major. So I thought, wow, this is really cool. And we didn't just like do acoustic or anything. We did full arrangements. So I thought, oh, this is going to be so cool. So when it comes out, especially since, I had friends that would ask me constantly, when's it coming out? When's it coming out? When's it coming out? People got impatient about it, right? But then when it came out, everybody was like, oh, cool. I mean, I'll never forget. I even had a friend, one who persistently was like, so when's it going to be done? When's it going to be done? And I was selling the album for $8, $7.99 to be precise, but $8. And he actually only semi-jokingly asked, well, I'm your friend, so you'll give it to me for free, right? Which, like, dude, you literally lived with me in the dorm for the like year and a half that you saw. You would go home for, fall break, and I stayed here to record. On Friday nights, you went out and socialized, and I stayed here to record. Like, you saw the sacrifice. You saw firsthand all the amount of work that was poured into this. And you want something for $8 for free? I mean, like, $8 is literally cheaper than a coffee date, right? Like literally, even if you just get coffee, on average, especially if you include tip, that's probably going over $8. Like, $8 is nothing. And I get that buying music, even back then, right? Like, this is 6 years ago or so that this specific album came out. And I get that even back then, the whole buying albums thing was basically dead. But these are some of your closest friends who literally saw you. Like, they literally would walk by you as you're recording many parts of this album. They know better than anybody the amount of hours put into this. And they still have, like, just the idea of asking such a ridiculous question. Like, it is one of those things, like, I mean, yeah, but you should be the one who, like, I saw all your work, and I want to support you. So let me do my tiny little part of paying you $8, right? Like, that's what you'd think, but that's just not how it goes. So the reality is, you might expect, right? You have 300 Facebook friends, 100 of those people you have talked to in the last year or two, and 50 of those people are people that are actively in your life, between family that you actively see, some of your best friends, people maybe at your church or at your whatever that you see often, right? So 50. So you think, man, I post this music, I just came out with an album, it's a ton of work, or even an EP or a single, people are just going to eat it. No. I'm just telling you now. No, like, don't be surprised if you release a single, you release a song, and, you get a couple comments like, oh man, this is really cool. But for the most part, it just kind of feels empty. Like, what even just happened? Like, I feel like I did a cool thing, and I don't know, maybe I should get something. I mean, I'm not saying people should come up to you and pay you money, right? But like, if your semi-amusing status commenting on some random world event last week got 10 likes, you probably aren't expecting your, hey, I recorded an EP post, like 5 songs, to get 5 likes, right? Like, that's insane, seemingly, right? Now, and this isn't even getting into the whole, like, well, how many people did Facebook show it to? The point is, when it comes to support from people you will almost definitely be disappointed, because as little as you can possibly expect from people, they will probably still disappoint you. And again, I'm not trying to be Debbie Downer. I'm not trying to say that your friends suck or anything. It's just, again, the reality is, people who like you are not the same as people who may like your music. And, another level of the reality is everybody wants good original music out there, but they want to be fed it from the radio. They don't want to go see you perform original music, right? Like, it's one of those weird things where, like, in order to play music, you often have to play covers because that's what people want to hear. But those same people are people being like, oh, why isn't there great, new original music out there? Well, because you'd rather hear some crappy rendition of Living on a Prayer by some local band whose singer can't even get halfway to the high note. Not even counting the key change, just the original one, which I believe is tenor high C. He can't even hit the G, much less a tenor high C. And you wanted to hear that rather than some original song that actually fits that band that they wrote that's new. And so this sort of all ties in. This is the main one of the 3 I want to hit, which is why I'm spending a while on it. If there's one thing you get from this podcast or this video, if you're watching on YouTube, it's set your expectations low as far as how people receive it, and do not take it to heart and assume that your song is garbage just because people don't care. Specifically, I will say this. If anything, the first song you post, people will care, but people get over it really fast, right? Because I remember thinking, like, man, if each of my friends shares this song, and I'm talking like my closest friends, like people that I would plan or eventually did have in my wedding party, if just all of them share 2 or 3 songs from the album over the course of weeks, imagine how many ears it could hit. Which seems reasonable, right? I mean, I'm not saying that, each person who shares, now there's 200 more people that actually saw that post on Facebook or that tweet or whatever, and they're all going to listen to it and become instant fans. That's not what I'm saying. But you would think at least, like, I don't know, close friend, at least do the lazy thing and click the little share button to share the post you did. No. No. Maybe 1, maybe 2. It depends. I mean, again, some friend groups are going to be different. Some people are going to be different. Your experience might not be quite as devastatingly disappointing as mine was. But, again, cannot convey enough. expect very little, expect nothing as far as initial success and people like caring about this thing that you do, no matter how good it is, right? The unfortunate reality is you may post it on Facebook, be really excited, and then get, a couple of people comment, oh, this is really good. And one person shares it, maybe, and then nothing. And within a day, it's all over. Nobody cares anymore. And you feel like, is that it? And don't be surprised if then you shoot me an email. You're like, okay, am I crazy? Was this a terrible song or whatever? Let me reach out to Joseph, because he's the only person I know for songwriting, right? That's why I listen to his podcast. I don't have friends who songwrite or whatever. So my closest relationship songwriter-wise is Joseph from Songwriter Theory, which, by the way, I fully welcome that. I would love for you to send me songs. That would be super awesome. I've had somebody do that, actually. It was super awesome. But anyway, don't be surprised if then I'm more excited when, you may have never emailed me before. It might be the first time you ever email me. So I don't know you at all at that point, outside of like, oh, that's cool. It's somebody who listens to Songwriter Theory. It's somebody who watches Songwriter Theory. That's cool. But besides that, I might not know you at all at that point. And I might be more excited, probably will, than a lot of people that are excited about your song, which seems, again, crazy. But you have to realize, just like you might not really care what some of your close friends or relatives do for a day job, right? Like, I don't really care about the ins and outs of what my friends do during the day, for the most part. Some of them I'm more interested than others, right? Because I find some of their jobs more interesting than the others. And, this whole scenario that I'm talking about right now, trying to be transparent about, has really inspired me that, like, now when my friends create something, I try to, like, really make a point of it, right? Like, if my friend makes a cool thing, I will share the crap out of that. Like, just because I know how it feels, right? So also, if you have friends who do music stuff, go the extra mile. Help them out. Help out a friend. Help out a brother or sister in need. So I know that was a long time, but that was the main point that I want to hit. There's two more, which I'll probably go through more quickly, but that is the main thing I want you to take from this. If you find that helpful, drop a like if you're on YouTube. And if you're on YouTube, or if you're listening to the podcast and you're just now realizing, oh, he's actually going back to doing this on YouTube as well, feel free to hop over to the video, hit that subscribe button, click the little notification bell, because every week I'm going to be helping you with songwriting at least once a week. I'm hoping to move towards 2 times a week sometime in the future. I don't know when yet, so don't quote me on that, but that is the goal. But for now, every Monday. Number 2, you're going to do stupid, regrettable things in your songs. So I've talked about this before, but my biggest regret with that first album that I did when I was in college is that I had tempo changes. Tempo changes are the worst. Don't do tempo changes. It's obvious. Usually it's unnecessarily jarring. It feels like you're trying too hard, or it feels like you're being some post something band, like, or you're some indie band trying to be different. It just almost never sounds good. There are some exceptions to that, but as a general rule, you should think to yourself, tempo change, I better have a really good reason to do it, because otherwise it probably just means I haven't figured out the right tempo that works with the verse and the chorus and the whatever. Because if you're having huge tempo leaps, then feels like something's probably wrong. And if it's a small tempo change, then why even change it? Just meet in the middle, right? If you have 120 and 128, just do 124 across the whole song. You'll probably be good. But, that's an example of something very regrettable that I did, right? Like, to this day, despite the fact that I am overall proud of that album, the vast majority of it I wrote while I was in high school, which, if you take the average high schooler with songwriting, first of all, most haven't even started songwriting in high school, but if you have, the average song is so bad, right? I mean, like, think about your average local band. The reality is there's just a lot of bad songwriters out there, right? Like just bad, right? And so take that and make it a teenager, right? So expectations are very low. So while I overall appreciate that album still, I can't listen to it. I can listen to a few songs, like 4 or 5 maybe out of the 10, but some I can't. And for most of them, the reason is the tempo changes. I just can't do it. I can't do it. There's other little things like mistakes we made with recording the vocal. I was too close up on the mic, so it had to be like way over EQ'd to get rid of the overly dark tone of being up on the mic and the proximity effect, which is basically the closer you get to a mic, it really picks up the bass frequencies a lot. So there's other mistakes like that I can't unhear it, right? And you're going to be your own harshest critic. So there's a bunch of stuff. But man, the thing that makes some of those songs unlistenable to me is the tempo changes. And the worst is when I am otherwise proud of the song, or at least, at peace with the song, except for the tempo changes, when I think, if you idiot just didn't do the tempo change, you could listen to this song still. You would not have this like almost animosity towards your own song or bitterness towards it because you put tempo changes in. So luckily, almost all of the best songs of that album, I didn't have a tempo change. Like the 5 songs that didn't have a tempo change were 5 of the best songs. One of them that is one of my favorites from the album does have a tempo change, but it's super subtle, so you can't really tell. So luckily, at least that. But going off of that, an album is a huge endeavor. Huge. And the first thing we released, besides like a single from the album a month before, was an album, right? Because I thought, how cool would it be to record an album? And I was still, and I kind of still am old school. Like I like an album, not like an album, but like I like 10 to 12 songs of new music. I like the journey that can take a listener on. I still enjoy, like, the artists I really like, I listen to their album front to back. I don't just listen to random songs from them. Like, I enjoy that experience. So being someone like that, I thought, man, it would be cool to write an album or to record an album, which, yes, it was cool. It was a cool experience. I do like that, even though for the rest of my life, as of right now, I feel like I'm going to just do EPs and singles, which I'll get to why. Even though that is true, there's something cool. It's kind of like once you do, like I did a half marathon. I never plan to do a half marathon again. I enjoy a lot of different exercise. I enjoy doing Insanity Max 30. I enjoy biking. I enjoy lots of things. But running is not something I love enough to train for a half marathon ever again, I don't think. But it's a cool check. Like, that's a cool thing that I did. It's not crazy, right? Like, a lot of people have done half marathons, but it's still like a cool, I did that accomplishment that you can check and call it a day. An album's a similar thing, but it is so much work. And at the end, you're still inevitably going to end up with probably 3 to 5 songs that are just killer and awesome. And then 3 to 5 songs that might be really good still, or good still, but not quite up to the standard of those first 4 or 5. So why do those last 4 or 5? Because it comes at the cost of it taking twice as long, at least, right? Because now you have twice as many songs to record. Concentrate on the good ones, right? We aren't paid to, probably most of us have day jobs, right? We can't afford, or like me, you are currently in college, right? Because I was in college at the time. We don't have all the time in the world to record albums, right? Most of the artists who are recording full albums are artists who literally that is their job, right? They go on tour, they record the next album, and then go on tour again, right? Like, that's oversimplified, but that's basically what they do, right? So it makes sense for them to record a full album. But for you and I, it's a lot of work. And especially it's a lot of work. And, we'll end up being a year and a half of that whole, like, people keep asking you, hey, when's it coming out? When's it coming out? It's better to just release a single, right? Throw a song out there. Maybe throw another song out there. Do a 4, 5, 6 maybe song EP. Throw it out there. Call it a day. And now you can start working on your next EP. And you know what? Your next EP might have 3 of the songs that would have been the last, like 3 of the last 5 songs on your previous album, right? So, like, it's not like you can't eventually record those songs that you are cutting that you would have had on the album but didn't have on the EP, right? Because I get it. If you have a song that you do want to release at some point, I totally get that, right? My upcoming EP, I have a song that I really love that had it. I think I wrote it before we finished the first album, but it was sort of at the point where, like, most of the songs were set in the first album. And even though I liked it more than some of the songs in that album, it just the timing wasn't right. So I pushed it and I said, oh, we'll do it for the second album, which never happened because the band broke up. So I still have all those songs written and half recorded and stuff and ready to go. But because a lot of those are very rock band centric, and it seems weird me alone finishing them, although I am doing it now because I'm like, no, I'm not going to wait for a band. That's silly. But anyway, so now I got to be honest. I totally lost my train of thought. We can be honest with each other, right? Totally lost my train of thought. There is some real honesty. Just admitted on camera and in podcasts. I just lost my train of thought. So that's my reasoning for really pointing you towards maybe doing an EP or a single. Up to you. Just take it from me. There's something discouraging about, because there's such huge build up to an album, right? And you can cut that in half with an EP, because build up doesn't really help you as a small artist. It might help a larger artist, right? But for a smaller artist, the reality is people are just going to stop caring. And then it becomes anticlimactic, and it's a lot of work for, not a lot of gain, because you could have just done 2 EPs and now it's 2 separate things, and people are getting music twice as often, half as much, twice as often, but still, how often they get it's probably more important than overall song count. So there's also some lyrics that I look back on, and they no longer qualify for the rule that I've talked to you about many times before, if you've ever been with us before, which is my rule of a lyric is good if I can feel good about putting it up on a wall in a frame. And it doesn't need music. It is just a quality lyric poem, if you want to see it that way, on its own. And it doesn't need the help of lyrics. The help of music. It stands on its own. To me, that is a mark of a great lyric that I'm happy with. And some of those songs do not pass that lyric test anymore. Now, I'm not saying they're horrible lyrics, but there are definitely some that are borderline corny or definitely in the corn territory. And not corn with the K, like hard rock band, like corn is in corny. And just in general, right? Like, it's some of those I wrote in high school, and I'm 27 years old now. So the reality is, I'm in theory 10 years better of a songwriter, which is a long time, right? 10 years in a job is often the difference between lowest level junior and a senior of whatever that job is. It's a long time. But here's the thing. As good as you are for the time, right? Like, oh, it was a great song for a first song, and it was, considering I was in high school, considering I was this old, considering it was the 3rd song I ever wrote, it was good. Like, the reality is at some point you're going to look back at some past stuff and you're going to think that's no longer up to my standard, or you might even cringe at it. It's just the reality. Like, I don't know what to tell you, because I thought, oh man, I don't think any of these songs I will ever cringe at. I think I will become a better songwriter, and some of them will sort of fall off and be like, yeah, okay, they're fine. But I definitely didn't think that there would be some I cringe at. And don't get me wrong, I'm still very proud of parts of that album. There's still songs that I would play to this day very happily. I've even considered re-recording some of them because I know more about recording now and I feel I could do a better job than I did then. So don't hear me wrong. I'm not saying everything you do early on is going to be junk, guaranteed. Not at all what I'm saying. Just prepare yourself. No matter how much you listen to this podcast, if you write down and take notes every time I teach you, it doesn't matter. You're still going to do some stuff that is just someday you're going to look back on and be like, yeah, that wasn't that great. And that's okay. It's a part of the growing process, right? Like, you're never going to get better if you don't do. We talked a couple weeks back about, the best way to become a better songwriter is to songwrite, which sounds like a cop-out, but it's one of those obvious things that people don't do, right? Like, I'm a little curious how many of you were like, oh crap, when I said if you haven't songwritten in the last 10 or 20 episodes you've listened to of this, I wonder how many of you were like, oh, that's me. If you're on YouTube, let me know in the comments if that's you. If you've listened to 10 to 20 pieces of content about songwriting in a row without having done any songwriting. Third thing, before we wrap up, it is amazing how much creative work you can do with nothing to show for it. So this is similar to what we talked about a couple weeks back about the reality of the writing process. And to this day, and I've been songwriting really songwriting for over 10 years, probably 12 years. But I started with like early middle school songwriting, 15 years ago. And to this day, it never stops kind of surprising me just how long you can work on something creative and make very little progress. That if somebody from the outside saw your before 10 hours worth of work and after 10 hours worth of work and be like, 2 lines changed, right? Like, and that seems insane, but sometimes that's how it works. Or, and when I say 2 lines changed, I mean, usually 2 lines changed in the sense of like, in the current draft, 2 lines changed, right? Because you might have written a ton of different versions and it ended up being a minor change that it had in like the actual draft you're working on. And the amount of time that you can sit around just kind of, dwelling on where you want your song to go, mapping out where you want your song to go. And it's just amazing how much time can go by with little progress. And it's easy to start to feel incompetent, but that's just a part of the creative process is, it's not like I'm in my basement and I installed the floor with a couple of my friends and I installed the trim. When I installed the trim, or the floor for that matter, it's laminate, it takes a certain amount of time to put a plank down, hammer it in, and move on to the next one, right? Now, some take a little longer, right? Edge pieces needed to be cut, and certain pieces didn't want to fit as well as other ones. But for the most part, you could bank on like, it's going to take this long because I know how long each plank will be, and there's steady progress, right? Like, there was basically never a time that you could, like, if my wife came downstairs, looked at the progress, went upstairs, and came back down 20 minutes later, there would be visible progress every time. Same with the trim, right? This is going to be visible progress every time. So a lot of work like that, or cleaning the house, right? Like, if you're washing the dishes, somebody should be able to look away for 20 seconds and look back and be able to see some progress, right? Creative work is just not like that, especially songwriting. I mean, again, I've said this before, but it's not the same as like writing a book. If you're writing the first draft of a book, you're probably typing. And I'm not saying you don't plan and you don't outline, and there's not some of this as well. There is. But for songwriting, there's sometimes a little less of that, and there's a lot more just narrowing down on making sure you get the exact thing right. Because at the end of the day, right, a book is going to have a ton of words. And making sure every little word is perfect is probably not realistic. Making sure everything is overall clear and that most, like, the words are good overall, yeah, sure. But, like, in a lyric, you should be at some point not worried, but thinking through every single word, making sure it's the right word kind of thing. And sometimes that involves a lot of brain work, a lot of creative work that doesn't actually have obvious, seeable progress. It just doesn't, it doesn't result in progress that is obvious to the eye. Word count is not a good indicator of writing progress when it comes to songwriting. Word count does not matter. Don't even look at it. And songwriting has one of, if not the worst rates of time versus obviously impressive thing to show for it, right? Like, you can take easily, a song could take, 50 hours of work to write or much more. And the end result is a 4-minute song, right? Like, it's kind of like making a highly produced video, right? Like, if you wrote a skit and filmed a skit in decently high quality with like a couple cameras, right? And you get your friends to act, like, that's going to take an ungodly amount of time for a 4-minute video, right? Whereas me right now, I'm stream of consciousness talking. It's a podcast, right? And I'm creating like I don't know how long it's been so far, but 30-40 minute podcast, real time. Like, the total of editing I'm going to do on this is like take the audio, match it with the video, and then, cut a little bit and then leave the whole thing as is, except like color correct the image. Try to make it look a little better because it's from my webcam, right? Like, that's all I'm going to do. Whereas, that 4-minute video, so a tiny amount, like 10% of the length maybe, because this is probably hitting 40 minutes or past at this point. So 10% of the length of this video, and it will take exponentially longer to make that video. So songwriting is sort of like the worst case scenario of that, right? As far as 4 minutes of content, how long you could take to make 4 minutes of content, it is about the worst. Just, it is. Like, I don't know what to tell you. That's the reality of it. As far as making 4 minutes of entertainment for somebody, I can think of no less efficient creation than that. Another thing just to keep in mind. I hope this was helpful to you. If it was and you haven't already, be sure to drop a like. If you are on YouTube, if you are listening via podcast, please leave a review on iTunes. I appreciate all of those very much. I appreciate you just for listening, just for watching. So if you're new here, and if you're watching and or listening to this and you have literally listened to every single piece of content I've ever put out, wherever you are in that spectrum, I appreciate you taking the time today out of your day to listen and or watch me talk about songwriting. I hope it was worth it to you. I hope it was helpful to you. Let me know if it was or wasn't. If there's something specific you want me to talk about, I always respond to emails, joseph@songwritertheory.com, or if you're on YouTube, just comment below what you want me to talk about, and I will certainly try my best to get to that. I always enjoy my time talking to you, and I will talk to you next time.